The daily countdown begins less than a week until U.S. Election Day. Americans will soon head for the polls to determine House representatives, senators, all the way up to the president. So far, almost 75 million people have voted early. Democrat Joe Biden is currently polling at 50.6% nationwide, with Republican Donald Trump at 41.8%. Both already cast their votes. They crisscrossed the country to meet voters after going head-to-head in two presidential debates. Both are making their final campaign pitch, while rising COVID-19 cases and deaths still ravage the U.S. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, shares his views on U.S. policy to control the pandemic and his scathing assessment of the American president's 4 years in the office. Take a listen to this exclusive interview with him. Professor Sachs, once again, a pleasure seeing you.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much.
Election coming up. One of the first important issue, of course, is the pandemic, even though the president does not like to talk about it. What do you make of the performance of the current administration regarding prevention control?
Many other countries in the Asia-Pacific region have demonstrated that this virus can be suppressed, that it's possible to stop the transmission. But of course, you need a system. But we don't have a system in the United States. We have no national policy whatsoever. And this falls at the hands of Trump and his failed team. I think it is the single biggest failure of American leadership in modern history. And I hope the voters reflect this in their decisions in the election next week. I've never seen anything like this. Anti-scientific and absolutely without reason, and the result is mass death.
Blaming China seemed to be the strategy for this campaign of President Trump. Mr. Biden, of course, also touched on that. What do you think, Professor Sachs, the real reasons of the current situation, and will blaming China be the winning strategy for any of the candidates?
In the U.S., we are with a population that is very susceptible to fear, doesn't know much about the outside world, and when our leaders declare, for example, a war on terrorism or some kind of other campaign against foreigners, a lot of Americans instinctively take this approach. Trump has blamed U.S. problems on China since the 2016 campaign. He said by getting tough on China, he was going to restore American jobs and restore American industry. And then he has blamed China for the pandemic, even though all countries in the world have faced this challenge. Some have done well, and the United States has done terribly. But for Trump, he doesn't want to talk about the truth or the evidence. Blaming other countries is his tactic. Unfortunately, many people believe in that in the United States because they don't know better, and they hear a lot of propaganda in the airwaves, and the result is that it's going to take a real effort, even when Biden comes in, to reestablish some baseline, normal, grown-up, mature relations between these two very important countries that have so much to do together, that face so many common challenges where cooperation is really important. We're going to have to work to get back to that.
Professor Sachs, some suggest that no matter which one of the two candidates come into the White House eventually, the coming year, there's still likely to be the strategy of blaming China, and that domestic politics will not be able to handle. Do you have that concern?
Both parties has been anti-China during this campaign. Indeed, sometimes they're competing. Who can be tougher on China? This is not so unusual in American election politics. But I hope that after the election, a more responsible path will be chosen, I'm certainly going to be raising my voice at every opportunity, assuming that it is Joe Biden as our new president, to explain how important it is to establish good relations and especially deep cooperation on areas like controlling the pandemic, on sharing vaccines worldwide, on strengthening the multilateral system, on establishing, again, cooperation on international trade, and together on fighting climate change, because our agendas and our needs are the same. We really need to work together, these two countries, the two biggest economies in the world, to solve these global problems, and that certainly is the case I'm going to be making. I know that there will be still, under almost any circumstance, a feeling that being tough on China is the right strategy, but it's a very naive idea. With a Biden presidency, we have a much better chance, a much better chance of having serious, decent, institutional, long-term cooperative relations.
Of course, what you have right now, a president very unique in the American presidential history, some suggest, that he also has been testing the limits of presidential power and certainly using them very well to his advantage. And therefore, people are asking about how the systematic building inside the United States about his political system and what we could learn from this 4 years of presidency.
What we have learned is that an American president, if they don't have self-control, may not have very much institutional control, in fact. Almost everything that Trump has done, for example, the unilateral tariffs put on China, or the measures to stop the sale of semiconductors to China, or the unilateral sanctions that the United States has put on other countries like Iran and Venezuela, or withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, or withdrawing from the World Health Organization. These have been one-person decisions. There isn't even a council that agrees on this. This is one person operating in a framework of executive decrees, and we think, or we claim, that we have a balance of power and checks and balances of our institutions, but this has proved to be very weak in the U.S. setting, which is why many of us have been very alarmed at Trump. But I have seen with the rest of us that by declaring emergencies, he is able, as one person, to take measures that should be under the consideration of our Congress, for example. Now, often the U.S. courts, months later, have said that what he did was illegal. So the U.S. courts have repeatedly overturned his measures, but he's now appointed so many judges that they are also bending to his will. So even the courts, which are a partial limit, are a very weak control right now. This is why Trump is a danger to our political institutions and a danger to the world, in my opinion. I think it's an opinion shared by many Americans, but it's going to still be a very divided country, and Trump has strong supporters, we know. That makes him especially dangerous. But the institutional controls on Trump's actions are extremely weak, and that's true in foreign policy. It's true in military actions. It's true in financial sanctions. It's true in trade sanctions. It's been rather shocking to me to watch the power of one person, especially a person that I regard as irrational and unstable.
Professor, there's another important question regarding the upcoming election, that people are looking at the division inside your country, which has been exacerbated, some suggest, by the pandemic. And now the stock market, as we have seen, today has been tumbling, and of course we hope that is not going to be the case because the economy needs to prosper. We also see the pandemic continue to spread. We see economic challenges for your country. So do you think whoever comes into the office the coming year will be less unilateral, more international, will be less nationalistic than the current situation, or domestic politics will push whoever there the road?
There's a huge difference between Trump and Biden. Trump is a man filled with hate, whose politics is based on hate and division. So just as Trump is anti-China in his rhetoric and policies, he is anti-New York, anti-California, anti-blue state, so-called. He's a nasty man, and I personally view him, as many do, as a racist also, playing to a white population with prejudices against African Americans or Asian Americans or Native Americans and so forth. And so Trump has governed by division. His whole premise is that he's got a strong base, and if he is tough, mean, nasty, divisive, his base will give him more support, and this will be how he governs. So he's not trying to reach a large proportion of the population. He is trying to energize a part of the public through hate to keep power. Joe Biden is really very different. I know Vice President Biden for many, many years. I can tell you, not only is he a decent person and a person of integrity, he is a nice man. And I know that because I've dealt with him for quite a long time. He absolutely wants to govern a more united states of America, where, as he keeps saying in the campaign, it's not red states or blue states, it's together. Now, our divisions internally are sharp. They will not go away quickly, but I don't believe that they will prevent decent foreign policy and a more constructive foreign policy. And however the Democratic Party would deal with China, and I think there will be ups and downs on that, it will be much more rational and much more cooperative than with Trump, where there is no real cooperation. There's only Trump grabbing what he can get, taking any advantage, trying to play any power game, but not trying to establish a stable, longer-term relationship. He just doesn't even understand that, whether it's in his own business dealings or in his politics. His politics are very transactional and without principle. Right. And I think we've seen enough of that over the last 4 years.
Are you afraid that people would accuse you of being partisan? Are you concerned that when you talked what you talked to me today, that people would accuse you of trying to draw ballots into the Biden camp, not being impartial?
I'm known as an academic and as somebody who writes books and speaks my mind. I have been critical of foreign policy of American presidents for quite a long time. I had a lot of criticisms of President Obama's administration, but bigger criticisms of the presidents that preceded and followed him, George W. Bush Jr. and now Donald Trump. Call it as straight as I can because the stakes are very high, and as an independent academic and a scholar and somebody who works on these issues, and with a perspective of the United Nations, which I deeply believe in, I am not taking sides of a candidate. I am trying to recommend for my own country and the world what is needed for our safety and our survival right now. And what we need more than anything is international cooperation around the objectives of sustainable development. I wrote a book last year called A New Foreign Policy, Beyond American Exceptionalism, which was not about the Trump administration per se. It was about American foreign policy and our need to be more multilateral and to help working with China, with Europe, and with other regions to renovate and deepen the performance of the United Nations system.
I see. Finally, before we go, very briefly as well, Professor Sachs, this is going to be a different election, and some suggest that the result of the election will not be able to come out at the end, at least, of the election day. There could be nuances, and the exit poll could be not necessarily accurate for a media organization to call who's the winner, who's not. So what kind of situation are we likely to face? How much will the drama go before we settle down with a name?
This is the big question.
Yeah.
We don't know because last time the polls were wrong by a few percentage points.
Yes.
If the actual vote reflects the polling of today, then Biden's margin of victory would be large enough to be able to clearly declare a victory in the Tuesday election. But if the vote is closer, we know that Donald Trump will pull every stunt. He will create noise, uncertainty, lawsuits, challenges, people on the streets, and there is legitimate fear of a lot of turmoil in the United States in the weeks ahead. So what will determine whether we have clarity or not will not be the self-control of the president, that's for sure. It will be the margin of the vote. And I hope personally, under all of these circumstances, that Joe Biden wins by a large margin that makes it absolutely clear that he has won the election.
Jeffrey Sachs, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My interview with Jeffrey Sachs, professor with Columbia University. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye now.